did.
That's what it's called now.
It looks like,
Yeah.
I was like, it looks like summer
Sparkling
from a
lemonade.
distance.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so I'll get started. Welcome to the City of Evans work session. First item on the agenda is automated vehicle identification systems for excessive speed and red light violations.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. Back last fall, the council had a couple different work sessions on the topic of traffic calming and the various strategies that we have, and we developed some policies around how we'll work with neighborhoods for traffic calming requests. And one of the topics that came up, while traffic calming, that term is usually related to infrastructure, very rightly, the council brought up our traffic enforcement work that we do and kind of how, one of the ways that we could extend our traffic enforcement efforts could be through the use of the camera systems that you might see employed in some cities, some municipalities in Colorado. And those can be used, as you'll hear, for either speed enforcement or red light enforcement. So over the past few months, our police staff has dug into that topic and done the research on what kind of effectiveness that could have and how we could, if the council chose to employ those systems in Evans. So I've asked the chief to give an overview of that research and what the options could be and what some of the factors in council's decision could be. And I know he will introduce our sergeant who helped with a lot of that research and work. So take it away, Chief.
Very good. Thank you, Jim. Good evening, Mayor Rudy and Council. Chief Rick Grant. I'm introducing Sergeant Gabe Bremer. He was tasked with and enthusiastically dove into this project. He spent January in the acting commander position, so this was a good opportunity for him to be exposed to some of the higher level staff work as well, and he did an admirable job. And we have quite a bit of information for council for your consideration this evening. So as the city manager mentioned last fall, at council's direction, we explored and researched some technological potential traffic calming measures, I guess. And specifically, I think council was interested in some of the photo radar stuff, the speed stuff. But you really can't talk about that without talking about really the gambit of the AVIS systems, the automated vehicle identification systems, which include the red light cameras. And those are the two predominant systems that are used nationally. And in Colorado, there are 9 agencies in Colorado that do use them. So, just as a bit of background, council I know is aware that one of our priorities, council priorities and the police department's priorities is traffic safety enforcement. And we have been striving for a number of years to try to staff up a full-time traffic unit. And due to staffing levels, we have had some difficulty accomplishing that. I'm hopeful that this year we have some officers in training and we're going to get that system up and running in a full-time capacity. So in terms of sort of an overview of the cost of these systems is related to having full-time officers. The cost of for example, a speed monitoring radar van is about $90,000 to $102,000 a year to manage that piece of equipment. It's leased, and there's a monthly cost associated with the lease. So that's about the cost of a officer about halfway through their career. You're paying for about an officer with the use of that van. And you'll see later in the presentation that Colorado state law requires that we actually put an officer inside the van while it's monitoring traffic, because an officer has to verify the speeds independently of the technology. So you still have an officer sitting inside the van on the side of the road or wherever you put it to monitor this stuff. So in terms of that, there's no real cost savings. And frankly, I have a preference of having police officers on the road because I like citizens to see flashing red and blue lights on traffic stops. I think that sends a signal more so than a nondescript van on the side of the road. But that's just my personal opinion. And just so council's aware as well, I did just some quick research on our traffic enforcement efforts for the last several years. And when we had an officer assigned to the traffic unit, we were averaging around 3,100 to 3,500 tickets a year, moving violations, when we had somebody dedicated to it. When we don't have officers dedicated to it, our numbers tend to drop down to about half that. about 1,500 a year. So I am hopeful that our enforcement efforts will also be enhanced as we add staff. So these AVIS, like I said, there's a couple of purposes, both red light and speed. There's about 350 communities nationwide that use this equipment for red light cameras and about 150 for speed cameras. I'm not sure if, Gabe, maybe you can help me out with this, if Fort Collins uses speed cameras or just red light?
They do.
They use both?
They got me once.
Okay. So,
Long time ago.
yeah. So right now there are currently 9 Colorado agencies that are using AVIS devices for their traffic safety measures. So the types of devices, the red light cameras, I think if you've driven through Fort Collins, you're familiar with what those look like, the intersections, and they take pictures of cars based on where they're at in the intersection when the light cycles to red. And then the other 2 types of AVIS types of equipment include mobile radar cameras, which are just what they imply. They're just cameras that you can move and mount on poles, or they might take the form of a speed trailer that can be used in that capacity, or even handheld. And then the photo radar vans. I think we've all been introduced to one of those one time or another in our driving careers, are popular as well. So what sort of drove a lot of the, I think that a lot of the cities going for the kind of technology is that you know, we do have a significant number of fatalities every year involving traffic. You know, in terms like red light, there was almost 850 people killed in 2019 because of red light violations. A lot of those were nationally pedestrians, and almost 150,000 injured every year. So there's a compelling safety component for implementing this type of equipment. Likewise, the speed vans, you know, there are about 9,500 deaths a year related to speed. And of all fatalities on the highway, speed accounts for about a quarter of those. So again, a very compelling public safety reason to try to reduce injuries and fatalities associated with red lights and speed. So some studies that the sergeant found included that large cities that implemented red light technology, they were able to reduce their accidents, their fatal crashes by 21% by installing these cameras in their major intersections. And all fatal accidents were impacted by about 14% reduction, even at the red light camera signalized intersections. So they do have, for the studies conducted, they do have a broader effect on reducing fatal crashes when they're implemented. So red light cameras, they cost about $4,700 to monitor 1 to 3 lanes of traffic, and that's $4,700 per month on a lease. And they would require a city ordinance to allow those to pass, to be installed. So council would have to approve a new ordinance. And I just learned from our city clerk this evening that there is a legislative matter that was brought forward that was requiring the citizens of a city vote before a police department could implement this kind of technology. Now, I understand that has now been postponed indefinitely at this point. It has been tabled, but that was brought forward. And I know one major metropolitan area did remove their technology because of citizens' demands to get rid of it. So there is some talk about turning that power over to citizens. So some of the requirements we're going to implement, like a red light camera, you have to have signage that lets drivers know within 200 to 400 feet, hey, you got there's a controlled intersection with cameras on it, and fines are set at $75. The city cannot impose a fine higher than $75. There's no points assessed. If a person doesn't pay a fine like that, you have to send out an officer to provide personal service. So if they live in the city, we could probably do that with our staffing. If they live outside the city, probably not. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gabe, there's no warrant associated if they fail to pay, or is there?
There is not.
Yeah.
You can, some of the cities have process servers that they employ, you can recoup those costs of the process server and along that fine.
Right. So, yeah, and it just depends on how many you get and on how cost effective these are. So the city of Denver, obviously, they have a little bit higher population than we do, but they reported 21% fewer fatal crashes per capita at their intersections equipped with those cameras. Greenwood Village also saw reductions in accidents. And Gabe did check with Greenwood to see how they were doing on, how you doing on getting your fines paid. And about 54% paid on the first notice and about 65% paid on the second notice. So there's some effectiveness in collecting the $75 fine when the police send out the notices. One interesting point that we really hadn't considered until the sergeant did his research was that most of the cities that are implementing this use a revenue neutral program, meaning that they take the revenues from these programs and try to push them into other traffic calming measures, perhaps buying more equipment or other types of traffic calming measures, but they try not to show an increase in like city budget because of the use of these programs. So when we're talking in Evans, we did research on our 14 lighted intersections in the city. And you can see the data up here from 2019 through 2021, the number of total crashes that were related to our 14 intersections. Of those 120, 200 and some crashes, 15 of them were caused by red light violations that we could write a ticket for. And then an additional about 35 were maybe red light related. We couldn't really prove it. Our injury levels, we had no fatalities during that time in relation to intersections, red lights or otherwise, but we had a total of 6 injuries from those various accidents. And during those same time periods, you can see summonses that were issued by police officers for speeding. And again, 2020 was our kind of an anomaly because of COVID and staffing. We didn't see our traffic enforcement where we would like it, but officers are out there enforcing our speeding laws as well. So roughly 7% of all the crashes related to intersections were directly attributable to red light violations. So the speed vans, and these are kind of an interesting beast. They run between $7,500 and $8,500 a month to lease. Again, about $90,000 to $102,000 a year. There has to be a sworn officer inside of it. There must be signage posted, and you can't fine people more than $40 for speeding unless they're in a school zone, and then there could be an enhancement in a school zone. The state does regulate where these vans may be used. We can't just place them like on I-85, Highway 85, where most of our speeders and our more serious accidents are happening. In fact, we wouldn't be able to unless there's a construction zone there. So school zones, construction zones, neighborhoods, or along streets that border municipal parks are the places where these vans are allowed to be parked. And so I think one drawback from my perspective is that it doesn't give the police department the flexibility to really identify where the problems are and maybe put a van where we really need it, and we're restricted where we can put them. So I just averaged it, $8,000 a month between the two. It would take about 200 speeding tickets per month to break even, if you will. And that's not including that on average in Boulder, for example, they get about an 83% payment rate. So 240 tickets a year to break even on the cost of equipment. That does not include the cost of the officer sitting in the van as well, which is another soft dollar cost associated with it. So we did research some alternatives to bring to council, and if this technology wasn't something that was of interest. Again, we are striving to fully staff the traffic unit. I know we're all a little frustrated with that, I as well as you, but we're very hopeful for this year. But some other options would be maybe another speed trailer or two. They seem to have an effect, and we only have the one, and it's in high demand, frankly. We do get a lot of demand for the use of the trailer. There are some other technologies that the sergeant found, like electronic speed limit signs, which you've seen, that'll flash, hey, speed is this, you're doing this, or they'll flash red and blue if you're speeding, say slow down, that sort of thing. He also did some research on signal head visibility, and that does have an impact. So the higher visibility signal heads there are, the more people are aware of them, and they tend to slow down. And sometimes they're larger signal heads as opposed to, maybe the older, smaller ones that aren't quite as visible, especially in certain lighting conditions. There's several studies out that talk about the increased timing on yellow and red lights. So if you have like a 3 second, which is a common yellow light interval, if you expand that to 4 or 5 seconds, it gives people more time to slow down before they enter an intersection. And then have an interval between the time the east and west turns red and the north and south turns green. You know, have a 1 or 2 second interval for that. And that has some effect, so that's another option. And, you know, signage, hey, traffic light ahead, controlled intersection ahead, that has some positive effect. And then adjust approach speed to these types of intersections. It's a 40 zone until you're approaching the intersection. Now it's a 30 zone as you go through the intersection, and then enforce the speed aspect of that. So that's a conclusion of the research that we came back with, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Fred, I thought you had a question earlier.
I forget what it was. Something. I did have one. I do have one that I had from yesterday. The normal policy is you have to rent these systems. The cost of them is prohibited, or they just don't want to release the technology.
That I don't know. Sergeant?
You know, my guess would be the latter. None of the vendors I talked to had a purchase option. They were all leased, and with that lease comes maintenance, calibration, making sure the equipment's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's a cost that the city would have to incur if we were to buy them, but no, that was not an option of all the vendors I talked to.
Other questions, comments for Chief Grant? I have one. If you go back to the one right before that, so the one that got me right outside of the Denver Zoo was that with a camera on it. I didn't see that option anywhere.
So that's a great question. Our speed trailer does have a camera on it, and we can get them equipped that way, so we can actually take photographs, and it provides a myriad of data for us to analyze. But we can have the camera availability on these things. I do not believe that we can issue a summons based on it, though, and I'll have to defer again to the sergeant.
Yeah, all my research showed that you had to have a man. What was there?
It looked just like that with a camera on it, and then it went. And about 30 days later, I got a ticket.
Oh, they did.
How
do
much
one.
was it?
Yeah, I think $75.
Okay.
Okay.
It was just sitting right outside the zoo. They're off of is that Colorado Boulevard.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
there's
and
another option.
I'd be interested in knowing how much those are. So I did have a few comments too,
Yeah.
or questions or whatever. And one of them was the cost of that trailer, and in particular, the cost of one. Like you said, I know several other people who have gotten tickets off of a trailer like that too. So I'd be interested in that. I also do want to comment about the red light time.
That's where we
I tell you what, that's where we need to start, because on Highway 85, I will guarantee you every single time that I go and use that road in any of the intersections, someone is blazing through a red light. And if you don't stop and wait and look and make sure that it's safe to go, regardless of the green light, you're going to get hammered. And I can hear the highway in the mornings. It is one siren after another. So I know that stuff's happening. So
And another one just before you go, 65th Avenue, the intersection of 37th and 65th.
Mhm.
It's green and red, and then this one goes yellow, red, green, just bam, bam like that.
Yep.
There's no difference there.
I think that's the cost, the least costly thing that we can start with for sure. And then my other, there was two other things. Okay, sorry. Is it possible? I just wanted to also comment too, I guess. It seems really strange that we have a whole department full of officers and they're getting 1,500 tickets, and then we add one officer and that doubles it.
But that's all he does.
That's all
Yeah.
they do.
Well, he does it from a certain time. I mean, he's not working 7
No, I know what you're
days a
saying.
week, 24 hours a day.
But he's
So-
not going on the calls to.
I understand that, but I just think that one person is maybe not enough.
Yeah, and we are trying to get two. I want I want a full-time officer on each end of the week, so we have 7 days a week coverage.
That's what he's,
Okay,
and
yeah,
so 2 officers, one each day.
Because I can tell you, around my block at 5:30 every night, it's the Audubon. At 3 in the morning, it's the Audubon. So it's kind of hard if you're going to have one officer Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. What are we going to do with the streets at 5:30? And we've had neighbors in here complaining about the same thing. So it's not just, a random neighborhood. So then my other thing is when we get this enforcement going on, and it's talking a lot about signage, can we just have, I know it kind of gets, if we could just have other signs around the city saying, please watch your speed. And I know that they've done a study with those little green men thing where everybody put little green men, slow down, the little green slow down men out there, and then that was great for a month, and then everybody just blew it off. But I think that it would be really nice to have signs, watch your speed, and then occasionally have an officer right by the sign, so that we know that they're, that we're patrolling it. I mean, we've said it before. You go through LaSalle, you slow down. You go through Eaton, you slow down. All these other towns you slow down, but it seems like it is open season on speed in Evans. So I think that we should start with whatever we can start with to get it safer.
Obviously, you don't go through the cell at 11 o'clock for lunch.
Amanda, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I think just a couple of questions. The $4,700 a month for the lease, does that reduce based on the number of units?
No.
It does not.
Okay. And then how long is a lease obligation? If we were to have a lease, do we have to have it for a year, or not sure if there's a length of the obligation?
I did not research that. Part of the lease is them installing and setting up. So
Sure.
if we're setting them up and just tearing them back down, there may be a cost associated with that.
Yeah, I think, to Councilwoman Spears' point, I think there are a few areas that she said exactly what I was thinking, Audubon, the highway 37th seems to be the same way, that people just go very, very quickly. I think it may be advantageous to consider the possibility of installing 2 units and seeing what sort of revenues it generates. I think if one officer can generate 1,400 tickets, I'm pretty sure we would get that quite rapidly between 2 units that were appropriately placed. I think the other thing is, I do work with a small municipality that has these cameras, and I couldn't find quick enough the number of cameras they have, but they generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, and they're very small. So I do think that we could at least keep revenue neutrality in that circumstance, and I think that we could provide some enhanced safety to our residents. I know 37th, the number of accidents that happen there are because people are speeding and somebody tries to pull out of a neighborhood or something like that. And I think if we just had appropriately placed 1 or 2 in the city, they're going to start wondering where else they are. And in my opinion, I think it may be worth the investment of 1 or 2 to see what it's like. But I would like to know what that lease obligation is.
And Councilmember, for clarification, are you talking about red light cameras or speed cameras?
Probably speed cameras first. I think if people weren't speeding, they probably wouldn't run a red light. I think that's just my opinion. I think there are other ways we could reduce the red light thing. I like the idea of the lights being longer, although I feel like in most cities in Colorado, people think that running a red light is just fine. So just my opinion. But I think that we have other ways. I think if we can mitigate speed first, I think that might help elsewhere.
Got about 5 more minutes.
Yeah,
Who
and
else?
I was going to mention the same. I do agree with Councilmember Castle. I think the biggest concern is the speed within our community, and we're trying to mitigate that. And how do we mitigate that first? And I do believe that we should definitely look at the time intervals. And only that, we live in a place that it snows, and there's a lot of ice as well, and it gives time for people to kind of get through the light and not be in a hurry and potentially cause an accident. So that, for me, is the biggest concern also, is the weather that we have here, and looking into that. I'm also interested in what the mayor said in regards to the trailer and a camera. If we can utilize that option, I'm hoping it's more cost effective, where we can see like how many tickets with a camera we can, in essence, just see the numbers. And if it warrants for us to go to a different type, then I think that's like would be the first place for me to consider that. The trailer with the camera. So those are the two things. And I mean, I echo what a lot of people have already mentioned. I do agree with, let's take care of speed first. That's the important part. And then also another thing I think would be great would be the traffic signs, like slow down or slow down ahead. Because we do go from one speed to another speed in specific areas within the city. And if we have a sign that prompts people like, hey, and I know I've seen some throughout the city, but there's areas also where they're not well lit that we need to consider the lights. And I know we installed in one intersection by the school, I think it's 34th and 17th. I think that area, it's close to the school, and they have those flashing lights, and that area tends to be super dark. And at night, I was able to notice that people were stopping because they were able to really see those blinking lights. So I think considering that option, if we're definitely able to consider that in areas are not well lit, because we do have a lot of areas within the city that are not well lit. So I think that would definitely help for visibility.
Anyone else have anything?
I did have one other thing, and it's I'm going to demonstrate the Wyoming girl in me here. So one thing that I noticed, I live near 34th, I believe is the street that people were complaining about people speeding down, and just being near there, I know we've got the lighted trailer sign that often sits there, and that seems to help. But what really helps is just when an officer is sitting there, ticketing or not, I think the presence of a vehicle helps. So I don't know how we can look at options to increase visibility in, I remember in small towns in Wyoming, it was very common for there to be a vehicle, whether it was manned or not. Didn't mean you were going to get a ticket, but let me tell you, you sure slowed down because you didn't know. So I wonder what even increasing our visibility during certain peak times, or what our options might be around really simplistic measures like that could really help to reduce speeds. I know when the vehicle is present between Tuscany and Ashcroft, there were several people that made comments about it and really watched their speed. And I've noticed that I think it's made a difference in the long run. So I think there may be some other simple options, at least through neighborhoods and that sort of thing, that can really help as well.
Can I just add, I preferably would prefer, as mentioned, officers. If the cost due to having the van and, an officer within the van manning it, I mean, I would always prefer more positions. So that is just my take.
Do you have something else real quick, Fred?
Yeah, no, we didn't get a cost on this speed trailer. If you can let us know what that is, and also, some of the things that are mentioned here, like improving a single speed limit or the single head visibility. I think that if it's been proven in studies that helps. Especially when it's the weather's inclement, that would probably help. To do some of this. And the other thing is, when I travel and I'm going through these little towns in the middle of the night, and my radar detector goes off, and I'm looking all over for the police officer. A lot of times it's one of these little signs that flashes what your speed limit is, or what your speed is going through the town, and what the speed limit is. So they do work to some extent.
That reminds me, can we install one of those along the highway? I know that we have to work with CDOT and everything, but you know, your speed is this. I mean, because clearly when they're going 65 miles an hour, you know, down the highway and it's 50 miles an hour here, I mean, it'd be kind of nice to have even more of those around.
Yeah, I think the sergeant's research was that CDOT is not that difficult to work with if you want to install this kind of equipment.
And especially coming into the town, you know, coming over the bridge. Welcome to Evans, this is your speed, you know, and coming back down off of the Spaghetti Junction there, same thing, you know.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to Evans, tone it down.
Slow down.
Are you guys asking for any direction here? Or you
Mayor,
guys-
if I could try to summarize,
Yeah.
I'm hearing support for most of the items on this slide. The certainly signal timing, that was high. I think that has some strong support. More signage in general about speed, especially in the areas where we know are high speed areas. The signal heads, some of the other things here that we can do that have proven to help slow down speed. I'm also hearing, and this is what I want to check, the council would be interested probably in another work session after we've sharpened our pencil. I'm hearing some interest. I guess that's what I want to check.
Probably
If
not
there's-
on the trailer, on the van. That's
Not
a,
bad.
So-
put on this other stuff.
Yeah.
Some research on whether on this trailer option.
And how much, you know, how many more trailers you'd want or think you
Right.
need, that kind of
And just what it might cost, just kind of get a tighter real budget estimate for what that could cost
Yeah.
for us to actually implement.
And Amanda's question, the 4,700 a month on the other, if that, what the lease terms on that is.
And that's the red lights.
Yes.
I think Councilmember Castle, subsequently you mentioned you would be probably thinking of the speed trailer as the first priority.
I guess. Sorry, I guess I'm confused. So the camera on the red light would not a camera on a light, a permanent fixture cannot monitor speed. Is that what I'm hearing?
The red light cameras, they're different.
They're different.
They're different systems.
Right.
The red light cameras are the $4,700 per month for 3 lanes of coverage and $6,200 for more. The speed trailers that we have researched would be the 7,500, 850, or 8,500 per month on average. And so those would be the speed trailers.
Yeah, I apologize for my lack of understanding there. I think I'm more interested in a permanent speed thing. So to Mayor Rudy's point, I think I'd be far more interested in knowing the cost of a trailer and what that would be. Although I'd be very interested to know if there was a permanent or more permanent fixture for speeding.
So that's the research that we can do. We can bring that back to council.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chief Grant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The council discussion, if
Sergeant.
anybody has anything after the meeting.
You can put those as they come next to on the ledge by Julie's.
I'm just making sure everybody's awake besides me.
Well, you're not awake though.
I know. I'm trying though.
I gotta go do this. How are you? Hey, fine, Randy. How are you doing? Okay. I thought I got it. I still need, I need one for the podium.
I'm good. How are you? Steve, how are you? Oh, very cool. Where at?
Just Just so that when one goes up on the podium though, that we pull out.
Brings you back a little bit, huh? Yeah, that's right. That's where all stuff is done in local government. You get up in the big places, and that's another.